Another team will receive third-round compensatory picks for 2 consecutive years. Brandon, I'll start with you here. What was your reaction to this report?
Mixed reaction here. You know, I think we're moving in the right direction, but also it's sad that we have to put these type of things in place in 2020 to get people just a look at certain jobs and certain positions. But I will say this. You know, let's be honest here. The Rooney Rule hasn't worked. Coming into 2020, you know, there was 4 minority head coaches, 2 minority general managers. It hasn't worked. But Troy Vincent, VP of Football Operations, he's putting things in place. He's doing a great job of trying to figure out how do we fix this issue. This is one of many things. So basically what they're saying is that old way of thinking, how we used to do things in the past where not only in sports but across all industries where my qualified minority men and women, if I recommend them, I'll lose them. So let me not say anything and let me hold on to them. So now we're rewarding the teams that are developing the minority men and women. But I think the biggest flaw in what they're doing here is it's not rewarding the teams that's actually hiring and making decisions to bring in that recommended group. So this is a good step in the right direction, but at the end of the day, it's still sad that we have to put these things in place. Troy Vincent, great job, VP of Operations, for trying to get this done and shifting the narrative in sports. And once it happens in sports, then it's going to happen across culture and then other industries. Great job, Troy Vincent.
So here's why I'm glad, Brandon, and I echo everything you said about Troy, who's a great man and does great things in the league. Why I'm glad that the draft pick compensation would go to the team that cultivated the talent and then lost the talent rather than the team that's hiring the person. Because if it was the team that, if you hire a black head coach or hire a minority general manager and you get a draft pick, for some folks, even if they were being intellectually dishonest and just trying to muddy the waters, they would add an asterisk almost to those hires. Like, yeah, did you get the job because you were the best guy, or did you get the job because the team, you were close to the best guy and they get a third-round pick to go along with it? So this removes that asterisk that be associated with it. So that's first point. I think it's very smart in that regard. Second point is this. This is where you must address these issues. I'm going to talk about our industry. Sports media, sports television and radio has a major problem, and it gets glossed over, of lack of minority voices on the air that aren't former athletes. There are not a lot on national television or radio, black or Hispanic or Asian, whomever, folks that took my path, loved sports, studied it, went to school, and now have this massive platform. It's a bunch of white guys and a bunch of minorities that played sports, with a few Stephen A. Smiths, Michael Wilbons that have kind of threaded the needle there. Why is that? In large part, it's because at the entry-level jobs, at the smaller markets, at the smaller television and radio stations, they're not hiring black people. They're not hiring minority candidates. And so I didn't start here. I went Kansas City to Houston to here. Well, a big problem is the Kansas City's, Houston's, whomever, aren't giving people that don't look like me a chance. Same thing's going on in the NFL. It's that you're not getting on the track to be GM or the track to be offensive genius head coach if you're not a white guy. So this, I think, will change that dynamic considerably. And lastly, I will speak to my fellow white folks. We've got to do a better job of seeing a disproportionately white workforce in certain industries and assuming it was a meritocracy. Seeing that there's, okay, well, it's 96% of the people that in this position are white. It must have been the best person got the job. It wasn't. That's not how this works. You call it a meritocracy when it actually wasn't a meritocracy. So, Brian, I think this is an excellent step. I think it's a necessary step. And I actually think this step will affect actual change.
You know, Nick and Brandon, I agree with everything you guys have said, and I certainly applaud Troy Vincent and the NFL for what they're continuing to do. They're continuing to push the narrative and continue to push teams to say, hey, we got to look within ourselves, and we got to look at our coaching ranks. We got to look at our GM and upper level ranks as well to try to hire these minorities. So I certainly applaud them for that. It is disappointing, Brandon, that now we still are forcing the NFL to try to put minorities in a place where they probably should already be. Look at the NFL as far as the players. 70% or more of the players are African Americans, minorities. So there should be representation in the coaching ranks as well as the GM ranks. And I'll give you a great example. And Brett Veach is a guy I played against in college, but he started back with the Eagles back in 2004 as an intern, worked his way up to a coach's assistant, worked his way up to a scout, and then they moved to Kansas City with Andy Reid. At that point, he's a pro and college personnel analyst. He was a co-director of player personnel. Then he became the GM. But to Nick's point, you got to get these minorities in early. They have to be the quality control guys. They have to be the guys that have the ability, video coordinators, so they can work their way up to at some point they can be with the coach, build that long-standing relationship, build that situation where now the coach trusts them and have seen his hard work. So now the coach will say, you know what, I want you to be my guy that is in head of the scouting program. I want you to be the guy that's in head of the pro personnel. I want you to be my GM. But if they don't get those jobs, to Nick's point again, they're early on, they can't build that development. And in my 40 years, and I'm 41 years old, obviously, I have not seen an African-American, a minority, go from the lower levels and work his way up over time. And that's disappointing.
Yeah, well said, Brian. I have a few things. First one is the NFL has been very transparent about this process. And if you're more interested, and I'm going to read the URL just to make sure I get it right. You can go to operations.nfl.com and search for the diversity and inclusion report. And it's 40 pages, and it's got everything that you've ever wondered about. And all the data is tracked. So the work is being done. And some of these recommendations that this group is putting forward are we're seeing in like this resolution that just passed. But Troy Vincent on this podcast with Peter King said, you know, this is just one part of a multi-layered strategy. And specifically, he said, I want to get the quote right, this was a complete reform of the system that not only involves draft pick, but earlier on like anti-tampering policy, so that teams are being rewarded for developing rather than other teams sort of holding back opportunities or even the ability to interview, because that would be considered tampering. And they said when they brought that up, they had heard about that happening because teams are working in their best interest and not maybe in the best interest of the entire league. Brandon, go ahead. I know you wanted to get in.
Yeah, so Brian, you know what I would like to see happen and what needs to happen? And we've had these conversations before when we broke down the Rooney Rule. The last 5 years, every year we're talking about the Rooney Rule. What I think needs to happen needs to start from the top. I think the NFL needs to hire, whether it's a chief people officer or just an executive, someone who can work with the owners. That is the issue. So we can talk all we want about starting from the bottom and starting with head coaches and play callers, general managers, but the people who make the decision, they're going to hire people who they can relate to, people that they understand, people that looks like them. That is the issue. I'm not going to say it's racism. It's not always that. You don't have to go that far, but whatever industry we're in and we make key decisions, we typically go with the people that look like us, that we can sit down and have dinner with. But if you don't understand me with my dreads, if you don't understand that I come from Pittsburgh and, you know, I didn't have the same upbringing as you and I don't use the same words that you use, my demeanor's a little different, then you're probably not going to hire me because you're probably going to be a little uncomfortable. So for me, it starts at the ownership level, working with them to understand that it's okay to hire somebody who may not come from where you come from and may not look how you look.
Brandon, I think you're right. Getting the owners to understand that, but also getting the owners to understand that these people, minorities, have the ability to think the same way, to be able to cultivate talent, to be able to be leaders of men, not just at the coaching rank, but at the upper level ranks too. And getting next to those owners certainly is a big part of it. And maybe that position that you're speaking of will help to get that going.
And again, we applaud Troy Vincent for once again trying to move this forward. All right, we'll get back to on the field. Nick and his NFL tier committee met late into the night. There's been movement. Nick is exhausted from staying up all night. We're going to set it all up.